Meet Mr. Roy Caudill, a man who makes his living ensuring that the past stays firmly recorded and that the present stays strictly on schedule. He believes a camera is a machine without a memory, a cold lens that catches time, captures it, and moves on. But tonight, Roy is about to discover that time isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it's a closed loop, tightening like a noose around a small motel in the middle of nowhere. The feed is live, the connection is wireless, and the destination is shadow and substance.
Roy Caudill had wired half the roadside businesses between the county line and the four-way, 2 gas stations, a scrapyard, a pair of churches tired of watching their donation boxes get jimmied. And in 9 years of low-voltage work, there was exactly one thing he'd never once seen fail. A camera records it doesn't remember. Point a lens at something and you either catch it or you don't. The drive fills up, the oldest file gets overwritten, and time keeps moving the direction it's supposed to. That was the whole contract. The contract broke at Miller's Motor Court on a Tuesday night in July, and it broke so quietly Roy almost missed it. He was in the front office doing what he always did on a service call, pulling the lobby feed up on his laptop to check the exposure after wiping the lens, when the timestamp in the corner caught his eye. Last July. Same date, 1 year back, 11:42 p.m., and the seconds were ticking forward live the way a live feed ticks. Except 2 minutes ago, Audie Miller had walked through that exact frame with a case of water balanced on his hip. And on the screen in front of Roy, he hadn't. "You mess with the settings on this?" Roy asked, not looking up. Audie leaned over his shoulder, squinted at the numbers the way old men squint at anything with a screen. "Don't touch the thing. Don't know how." Roy Force quit the app and reopened it. Still last July. Still counting forward in real time. A year and a night behind where it should have been. He pulled the account settings, retention set to 14 days, same as always, cloud usage sitting at 11%, nothing archived, nothing backed up, nothing in any log that should let a single frame survive past 2 weeks, let alone 13 months. As far as the system was concerned, the footage playing in front of him did not exist anywhere for it to be playing from. He wrote it off as a caching bug and told Audie to call if it kept up. Kept up. By Thursday he was back. Not because Audie called, but because he couldn't stop thinking about that 11%. He set his laptop on the counter and split the screen, live feed on one side, the year-old feed on the other, and watched both at once with a bag of gas station peanuts he never got around to opening. At 9:14, a moth hit the porch light above the office door on the live feed. Bounced off. Kept circling. At what the timestamp called 9:14, 1 year and 1 day earlier, a moth hit the same light. Bounced off. Kept circling. Roy told himself moths do that. Bugs are bugs and lights are lights, and it isn't strange for 2 of the same nuisance a year apart to bounce off the same fixture on a summer night. He held on to that for 11 more minutes, until Audie's old tomcat trotted through the left-hand frame chasing nothing, and 4 seconds later the same cat, thinner, younger by a year it had no business having again, trotted through the right-hand frame chasing the same nothing. That was the night Roy stopped calling it a caching bug, even in his own head. He started recording both feeds off his phone just to have a version of events that didn't belong to the system. Each night he clocked the distance between them. Monday, the gap read 366 days. Wednesday, 361. By the following Tuesday it had fallen to 290, which meant it wasn't drifting the slow, lazy way a bad clock drifts. A year of footage doesn't lose 70 days in a week by accident. Something on the other end of it was closing the distance. On purpose. A little more every night than the night before, the way a man walks faster the closer he gets to a door he's already decided to open. Roy went looking for whoever had stayed in the room that year-old footage kept circling back to. Room 6, the one across from the office window, the one every angle of that old feed seemed to favor even though the camera never moved. Audie still logged paper for the guests who paid cash, so Roy found himself hunched under a gooseneck lamp at 1 in the morning with a ledger that smelled like clove cigarettes. running his finger down a column of names until he hit the single entry for that date. One night only. Cash. No car listed, which Adi never let anybody get away with. You wrote something in that box or he wrote it for you. Adi had written Roy C. Gray Ford, and under it, in handwriting close enough to Roy's own, that for a long 10 seconds, he thought he was looking at a form he'd filled out and forgotten. Roy didn't own a gray Ford. He'd never once stayed a night in a motel he'd been servicing for 2 years. And Adi, shown the page, went the color of the paper and aloud as how he did remember that guest now that Roy mentioned it. Remembered because the fella never left the room the whole night, curtains open, lights off, just stood at the window the entire time facing the lot like he was waiting on somebody to pull in. Adi hadn't liked it, had almost called somebody about it. Then morning came, the room was empty and made up neater than Adi ever made a bed himself, and he'd figured he must have imagined the not liking it part, the way a person will. The gap kept closing, and it stopped closing at a pace Roy could track night to night. The numbers blurred together the way a fever blurs a week. He'd check before he checked anything else on his phone, and the hundreds became double digits somewhere in there without a single morning where he could point and say that's the day it happened. If the pace meant anything, it meant the thing on the other end wasn't pacing itself to him at all. It had somewhere to be, and it was almost there. The night the number fell under 10, Roy quit pretending this was a job and sat in his truck in the Miller's lot with the laptop propped against the wheel, both feeds running, and made himself watch the room 6 window instead of the lobby door, because he already understood, the way you understand a name is about to be called before it's called, that whatever this was had never really lived in the lobby. The lobby was just the only place with a working camera. At 11:40 on the right-hand feed, a shape resolved in the room 6 window that hadn't been standing there a second before. Not stepped into frame, resolved the way a picture resolves out of static, as if it had technically been there the whole time and the feed was only now catching up enough resolution to prove it. It was a man built like Roy, stooped like Roy, standing in a window a year and however many days removed from the parking lot Roy was actually sitting in, and Roy understood, with a cold drop low in his stomach, that the figure wasn't looking out at that lot at all. It was looking at the camera bolted above the office door. It had been looking at that camera, patient as rot, for 13 months, waiting for the distance between them to close enough that being looked back at would finally mean something. The face was his own face, worn a year rough, the skin gone loose around eyes that hadn't slept right since whatever came after that night. And as Roy watched, the mouth started moving. No sound. The feed had never carried audio, not once. But Roy had spent 9 years reading lips off silent footage for insurance claims and custody fights, and he read these easy because it was his own mouth making the shapes, the same handful of shapes, over and over, worn smooth from repeating them to a camera that couldn't hear him and a man who hadn't been born into that night yet. Don't look. His phone lit up on the dash. A calendar reminder, the kind he set for himself 100 times a year and forgot just as often, except he hadn't set this one. The date on it lined up with the number still counting down in the corner of his screen. One word in the notes field, written in the version of his own hand he only used when he was too tired to perform his signature. Stay. 2 instructions from 2 ends of the same year, a few days apart and worlds apart, and Roy no longer knew which version of himself he was supposed to listen to, the one warning him off, or the one already standing in that window, still waiting, still counting, telling him not to run when his turn came to be the one behind the glass. He looked up from the phone. On the live feed beside the other one, room 6 curtains, closed an hour ago, he'd have sworn to it, were open now. He didn't remember Adi renting that room to anybody tonight. Roy sat very still with the engine off, both feeds glowing blue against the dark, and understood he'd already made his choice about whether to keep watching 3 weeks and 1 habit ago. The first night he split his screen instead of closing the laptop. The number did not care which warning he chose to believe. Kept counting down regardless, the way it had always been going to.
A technician's warning for the digital age. Be careful what you capture in the frame. For time is a meticulous bookkeeper, and it never tolerates an unpaid debt. Mr. Roy Caudill sought to fix the glitch in the system, only to discover he was the era waiting to be overwritten. Now he occupies a permanent room with a view, frozen in a loop of his own making, waiting for a past that has already caught up to him. A cautionary tale transmitted from the static frequencies of the shadow and substance. Stay paranoid, my friends.